Hello. In this video, we're going to be considering the various approaches an organisation can take to setting budgets. We will also consider the various problems that traditional budgets and their use create when they're used to control organisational performance. Finally, we will consider an alternative to budgeting altogether. Traditionally, budgets are intended to achieve 5 objectives, which can be remembered with the word PRIME. Planning. They allow the quantification of plans to see whether or not they are sufficient in helping the organisation to meet its overall objectives. Responsibility. Budgets are often broken up and shared out, with individuals being held responsible for the performance of part of that budget. Integration. The budget should show how the organisation is coordinated. For example, a quantity produced should be related to the quantity sold. Motivation. They can be used to set targets to encourage goal-congruent behaviour, for example by paying a bonus if people hit their budget. And evaluation. They can be used as a yardstick to compare actual performance to understand whether that actual performance was good, bad or indifferent. Budgets can be set at a senior level in the organisation and then percolated down through the divisions. This is known as a top-down approach. This is reasonably efficient and quick and also bears in mind the performance requirements of the largest stakeholder group, such as the shareholders. In addition, it's likely to be well coordinated, uses the extensive experience of senior members of management, and doesn't contain any budgetary slack. Budgetary slack is a buffer built in by an individual who is asked to come up with their own targets. However, top-down budgets are necessarily imposed on junior management, which can be demotivational. Because junior management are not involved in them, they may also be unrealistic and not committed to by junior management. A bottom-up approach starts off in the divisions of the business and asks junior management to prepare their own budgets, which are then summarised as they are consolidated up to a senior level. They should hopefully be realistic, as many hands-on managers have been involved in their preparation, and are more likely to be adopted as they were created by the individuals expected to deliver performance in relation to them. However, often budgetary slack will be built in. It's an expensive and time-consuming process, and there are no guarantees that the consolidated budget will be coordinated or reflect wider stakeholder needs. Many organisations adopt a blend of these two approaches in an attempt to get the best of both worlds. Junior management may initially draft the budget that's then reviewed by senior management and passed back with comments for further rounds of review. Budgets are usually created periodically, for example once a year. This is a relatively inexpensive approach, but unfortunately, especially in a fast-changing environment, the budget rapidly becomes out of date. This means the targets are inappropriate and in the event will be set too high or too low. Too high is demotivational and too low causes people to relax. Either is suboptimal. An alternative is to budget continuously, for example every month end, producing a budget for the following 12 months. This means the budgets reflect the most up-to-date information, making them more accurate. However, this is very time-consuming and therefore cost-intensive, and may mean that every month end the budgets are not really produced properly. There is an argument that says you're better off producing them once a year properly than 12 times a year inaccurately. They can also be demotivational. For example, if a salesman has an annual target of $1 million and they achieve $750,000 in the first 6 months, then their reward will be an increase in their target to $750,000 for the second half of that year. Rolling budgets, as they are known, are also difficult to use to assess performance. Any one month has had 12 targets set, a new one each month in the last year, so variance analysis becomes difficult to interpret. In reality, many budgets are incremental. This means basing next year's budget on this year's actual, plus or minus a bit. This can be realistic in a slow-moving environment and is easy to prepare, so everyone can get involved in setting targets. However, it's unlikely to be appropriate in a fast-moving environment where last year's actual does not represent what should be achievable next year. And incremental budgets may well also lead to an incremental business. It doesn't suggest dramatic innovation is likely. In addition, any inefficiencies in last year's actual will naturally be encouraged in next year's budget. They also encourage a use it or lose it mentality, which means people are encouraged to spend their budgets to make sure they get them again in the following year. An alternative to incremental budgeting is zero-based budgeting, which means starting from a budget of zero and building a business case for the area being budgeted from scratch. This encourages a fundamental rethink of an area of operations, stamps out inefficiency, and can be seen as a healthy re-evaluation. However, certain skills are needed to build a business case which may not be that common in the business. They take time to do and can be demotivational to people if they feel they're being asked to justify their position. It may not be actually necessary to re-evaluate basic operations all the time, hence many organisations zero-base on a rotating basis, so every department is zero-based, say, every 5 years. Activity-based budgeting involves building budgets using activity-based costing principles. Budgeted cost pools are built up by considering budgeted activity levels and cost per activity. This focuses primarily on the relationship between what drives cost and the level of cost itself, encouraging cost control in the organisation and the elimination of non-value-added activities. However, it requires a lot of information to work well. For example, a machine setup pool will require a budgeted number of setups to be available for the budgeting process. The time and effort involved in gathering this information may not be justified. If the organisation focuses excessively on its performance management systems and on whether or not an individual hits or misses their targets, this can cause all kinds of dysfunctional behaviour, such as misrepresentation, massaging results so they look better than they actually are. For example, highlighting well-performing products and trying to de-emphasize others. Gaming, making decisions to improve the performance measures even though this may not be good for the business as a whole. For example, delaying sales until the new financial year if this year's target has already been reached. Myopia, short-termism. For example, cutting back on training to increase profits this year. This may well be detrimental to the long-term value of the business. Measure fixation and tunnel vision. What gets measured gets done, focusing performance on those areas that will affect reported performance only. Ossification, turning to bone. The performance measurement system should be regularly updated and refreshed to reflect the needs of the organisation as those needs change over time. There is often a reluctance to change the performance measures once they've been set, maybe through a fear of a loss of comparatives, or maybe because of the considerable effort involved in overhauling a performance measurement system regularly. Lots of these issues can be overcome if management adopts a more profit-conscious or non-accounting style, to use Hopwood's terminology, and so not making performance to those targets excessively important in appraisals. Because of some of the downsides of budgeting discussed, some organisations adopt an approach known as beyond budgeting. This method accepts that setting targets in advance is futile in a changing environment, so suggests not setting them at all. This saves time and money and avoids the issue of targets being set too high or too low and the knock-on demotivational effects. The performance period starts with a discussion on what good performance looks like. In other words, what aspects of activity are more important than others. Performance is controlled by frequent backward-looking appraisals, asking the question, now we know what the environment has been like recently, how did you perform in relation to those known circumstances? In such systems, individuals are increasingly responsible for their own performance, so head office red tape is removed as much as possible to allow the freedom to pursue organisational goals in a flexible and proactive manner. Some organisations may feel that this is insufficient control to work in their organisational circumstances, and often doesn't alleviate the need to at least forecast for external stakeholder needs. In summary, we've considered the different approaches organisations take to budgeting and the various advantages and disadvantages of those approaches. We've also considered the merits of abandoning the budgeting process entirely with a beyond budgeting approach.